Every time I, as a black man, bring up the topic of slavery and the long-lasting effects that it has had on race relations here in America, there's always some joker in the crowd locked and loaded with this pseudo-historic comeback. Well, Irish were slaves too. Let's start with the obvious problems with that argument. Even if the Irish were slaves, which they weren't, but even if they were, which they weren't, the premise of the argument is that somehow the enslavement of another group of people justifies the horrendous and inhumane treatment of the first group of people. Let's be clear here. Slavery is wrong, and claiming that America held Irish slaves too, which they didn't, doesn't somehow vindicate America. If it were true, which it's not, it would only prove that America committed the worst human rights violation in history twice. But the fact is, the myth is not true. The idea of the Irish slave is based on an intentional misreading of history, motivated by a far-right agenda to marginalize any discussion of racial inequality here in America. In the 18 and 1900s, many Europeans, including Irish, wanted to immigrate to America to seek a better life for themselves. Many could not afford the trip, so they contacted landowners already living in America and sold them their labor services for a period of time, usually 5 to 7 years. Yes, the work was grueling and conditions were not ideal. But there are three major differences between the Irish experience here in America and the black experience of slavery. One, and most important, the Irish chose to come to America. They made a conscious and informed decision to sell their services for a certain amount of work in order to ensure passage to America. They made a business transaction. They were not kidnapped, placed in chains, thrown into a belly of a ship, and forced to work with no hope of a better life for themselves. They chose to work specifically for the promise of a better life. Number two, the Irish were never subjected to perpetual and generational servitude. The ultimate goal of the Irish was to work off the debt that they had incurred and then move on to build a life for themselves and their family as equal citizens. Irish servants' children weren't born into a state of servitude, and once the debt was paid off, the Irish were completely free to enjoy all that American life had to offer. A black man would always be a slave. His children were slaves. His wife would be a slave, and the law provided no way for him to ever be a citizen or to enjoy all that America had to offer. Number three, Irish servants were always considered human beings and not property by law. Black slaves were considered livestock, animals. An Irish servant having a dispute with his boss could take that matter up in civil court. Irish servants were afforded human rights and could not legally be physically assaulted. If an Irish woman was raped, she could press charges and even have that landowner thrown in jail. No such protections existed for black slaves because the law did not recognize their humanity. Slaves could be raped, beaten, and killed with no repercussions because they were no more valuable in the eyes of the law than a chicken or a dog. The bottom line is the Irish were slaves too myth is used to try and minimize the tremendous contribution that blacks made to the foundation of this country and the creation of a world superpower without any payment or even the dignity of being considered a human being. It's an attempt to try and shut up any black person who would dare to show that America's racial issues are rooted in one of the most horrendous crimes that was committed in human history and that it was sanctioned by the United States government. Don't let them distract you with the lie. Know the truth. I'm Roxx and I approve this message.